The Counting Tower. Chapter 1. The Pull of the Tower. The fog lay thick over gray water that evening, curling around lampposts and winding through narrow streets like smoke. Ellie paused at the edge of the square, her coat damp with mist. Even from here, she could see the clock tower, dark and looming, its silhouette sharp against the pale moon. Though its hands had stopped decades ago, Ellie thought she could hear it calling her, an almost imperceptible hum, like a whisper just beyond hearing. "Crazy," she muttered under her breath. I'm not actually going to." The words died in her throat as she felt the familiar tug in her chest, the same pull that had drawn her to the tower since she was a girl. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was curiosity, urgent and insistent, prickling her skin and whispering, "Come closer." Ellie's boots clicked against the cobblestones as she approached. Every step seemed amplified in the heavy fog. She passed the closed shutters of homes, the occasional yellow glow of a candle in a window, and the silent shape of the old bakery, whose sign swung lazily in the wind. Everything felt hushed, as though the town itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. At the base of the tower, she hesitated. The wooden door was warped with age, and the iron hinges groaned in protest when she pressed her hand to it. Dust rose in the faint beam of her flashlight, coating her gloves and catching in her hair. Just a look," she whispered. Her voice was swallowed by the fog. Inside, the spiral staircase wound upward, the steps uneven and slick with years of neglect. The walls were cold stone, etched with faint scratches, marks she didn't recognize. Her flashlight trembled slightly in her hand, and with each step, the soft ticking grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't a normal clock's ticking. It felt alive, measured, purposeful. Halfway up, she paused to catch her breath, pressing her back to the wall. Her heart thumped in her chest. "It's just a tower," she muttered. "It's just an old tower. That's it." A shadow shifted at the edge of the stairwell, just beyond the beam of her light. Ellie froze. "Hello?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. The shadow didn't answer. It didn't move. It simply waited, as if aware she was alive and choosing to climb anyway. She swallowed, steeling herself, and continued upward. At last, she reached the top. The door to the clock chamber was cracked, letting a sliver of pale moonlight spill inside. The room smelled of dust and something metallic, like old coins or blood left to dry. The clock face loomed above her, frozen at 11:57. Its glass reflected the moonlight, showing not her own reflection, but a darkness behind it, as if the air itself were holding a shape. The hands trembled faintly. She could see the vibration in the metal, subtle but unmistakable. And then, jerk. 1, 2, 3, and they stopped again. Ellie's breath caught. The ticking wasn't coming from the clock anymore. It was coming from somewhere behind her. A chill ran down her spine, and she spun around. In the corner, a shadow lingered. It had no features, no solid form, yet its presence pressed against her mind, heavy and unyielding. She wanted to speak, to move, to run, but the shadow didn't advance. It simply waited, pointing at the clock with a long, thin arm that seemed to flicker at the edges like smoke curling in an unseen wind. Ellie's heart pounded. The hands of the clock quivered again, as if counting down something she couldn't see. Every second dragged, every tick a reminder that she had come here willingly, and perhaps willingly was enough. She swallowed hard. I shouldn't be here," she whispered. The shadow didn't reply. It never did. It only waited. And as the fog thickened outside, curling against the window panes, the ticking seemed to seep into the walls, into the floor, into her very bones. Ellie took a hesitant step back, only to realize there was nowhere to go. The room was larger than she remembered, or perhaps smaller. Her sense of space was warped, stretched by the oppressive quiet. She could feel the weight of the tower itself, ancient and patient, holding her in place. Her eyes grew heavy, the faint rhythm of the ticking lulling her, in spite of the fear rising in her chest. She whispered again, almost to herself, "Just a tower, just a tower." And the tower seemed to reply, in the subtle way that the wind might whisper through a keyhole, promising that time was patient, and those who came here, who listened to its heartbeat, would find themselves counted in its rhythm. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Chamber. Ellie stayed frozen for what felt like minutes, though the ticking suggested that only seconds had passed. The shadow remained unmoving, its hand still extended toward the trembling clock. Her flashlight flickered once, then twice, and the room seemed to inhale, the walls pressing in closer. I don't know why I came up here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't even be." A sudden draft cut through the chamber, cold and sharp. Papers, long-forgotten ledgers, brittle and yellowed, fluttered across the floor, as if pushed by invisible fingers. Ellie's eyes darted around the room. The clock's hands quivered again, tiny tremors that made the glass hum faintly. The ticking was louder now, sharper, almost urgent. She took a step forward, hesitant. What do you want from me?" The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it shifted slightly, an imperceptible movement, like smoke curling toward the ceiling. Ellie realized that with every twitch of the clock hands, it mirrored her heartbeat, or perhaps it was the other way around. She tried to slow her breathing, tried to regain control, but the rhythmic ticking in the room pressed against her chest with each inhale. Steeling herself, Ellie moved closer to the clock. Her fingers hovered near the frozen hands. The metal was cold, far colder than it should have been. She felt an odd reluctance to touch it, as if the clock might respond to her touch in ways she could not predict. "Just look at it," she muttered. "Just look, then I'll leave." The shadow's hand lowered slightly, still pointing, but more like a guide than a threat. Ellie swallowed and traced a careful circle along the edge of the clock face, examining the mechanism. Dust covered the gears, and cobwebs clung to the edges, but everything else seemed alive. Subtle vibrations traveled through the metal into her fingertips, tiny pulses that matched the ticking around her. She took a step back and tripped over a loose plank. It groaned under her weight, a sound far too loud in the silent chamber. Her flashlight flickered again, and for a brief second she swore she saw another figure, a face, pale and hollow-eyed, pressed against the far wall. Then it was gone, leaving only the shadow and the trembling hands. Ellie sank to the floor, hugging her knees. "It's just my imagination," she told herself. "Just my imagination." The shadow didn't move, but the ticking grew louder, faster, insistent. Each tick seemed to echo in the floorboards, bouncing back at her from the walls. She realized she could no longer tell whether it was coming from the clock or the chamber itself, or perhaps from somewhere deeper in the tower. Hours might have passed, or minutes. The distinction no longer mattered. Time had folded in on itself, and all that remained was the steady, unyielding pulse. Ellie tried speaking again, almost pleading. I'm not here to stay. I just needed to see." For the first time, the shadow shifted fully into the light. It didn't have a face, but Ellie felt as if it were studying her, weighing her. The air grew heavier, pressing on her chest. Her throat felt dry, her mouth sticky. She tried to rise, but found her legs sluggish, unresponsive. The clock's hands moved again, slowly this time, a single trembling tick forward. The shadow nodded, or maybe that was her imagination,
but the sense of acknowledgement made her stomach tighten. The tower was aware, not cruelly, but patiently, inexorably. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to summon courage. "I'll leave," she whispered. "Just let me leave." But the ticking continued, echoing in her bones, and when she opened her eyes, she realized she had been looking not at the clock, but at the shadow. Its form had thickened, darker now, more definitive. It was waiting, and the hands of the clock were moving closer to midnight. Ellie's pulse quickened. She had climbed the stairs with curiosity. She had believed she was brave. Now, with the fog pressing against the windows, the clock's pulse inside the metal, and the shadow silently observing her, she wasn't sure she had any control at all. And yet, some small, defiant part of her wanted to see the final tick, wanted to understand the secret the tower kept. She didn't dare speak, didn't dare move. She only watched, waiting, as the minutes stretched and bent, as the clock and the shadow held their silent vigil. Time had become something she could feel, in the walls, in the metal, in the floorboards. And the tower, patient and eternal, whispered that it had been waiting for this night for far longer than she could imagine.
Chapter 3. The Weight of Silence. The moonlight slanted through the cracked windows of the clock chamber, painting long, thin stripes across the dust-covered floor. Ellie sat motionless, her arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the ticking that had grown both louder and deeper, as if the tower itself had begun to breathe. Each pulse resonated through her chest, mingling with the rhythm of her heartbeat until she could no longer tell where her body ended and the tower began. She finally dared to lift her head. The shadow had shifted closer to the clock face, no longer just a dark shape in the corner, but something that seemed to stretch across the floor, bending the light around it. She could feel its presence pressing against her, like a weight that had nothing physical to bear it. I need to move," she whispered. Her voice trembled, and even she could hear the hesitation that clung to every syllable. The shadow did not respond, did not move further, yet its stillness was more terrifying than motion. Ellie rose slowly to her feet, testing the floorboards with careful steps. Each plank groaned under her weight, an echo that rolled around the chamber like distant thunder. She reached the center of the room, where the light from the cracked window pooled like a shallow river across the floor. She took a step toward the clock. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The shadow flickered, not in anger, but in recognition, as if the tower approved or noted her movement. The hands of the clock trembled once more, creeping forward by the smallest fraction. Her stomach churned. Every forward tick seemed like a heartbeat closer to something inevitable. Ellie spoke again, this time louder, almost as if to assert control. "I'm not afraid." Her voice wavered, and she knew it. "I just want to understand, that's all." The shadow remained silent, but Ellie sensed a shift in its focus. It was not a threat, exactly, more like observation, a patient study of every small choice she made, every hesitant movement. The room felt smaller now, the walls leaning inward, just enough to remind her that the tower had been here long before her, and would remain long after. She took another step closer to the clock, then paused. Something in the metal gleamed under her flashlight, something subtle but almost imperceptible, a tiny scratch along the rim, forming a line that almost looked like a symbol. Her curiosity overcame her fear. She leaned in, brushing her finger across it. The metal was ice cold, but it hummed faintly under her touch, as if recognizing her presence. A sudden draft cut through the room, sending papers fluttering across the floor. Ellie's flashlight wavered, and for a brief instant, she swore the shadow had moved closer, though she could not tell. She swallowed hard,
forcing herself to focus on the trembling hands of the clock. They moved again, slowly, methodically. Tick, forward, tick, forward. Each increment almost imperceptible, yet every motion felt deliberate, purposeful. She realized with a cold sinking feeling that the clock had not merely stopped for time, it had stopped for her. Ellie stepped back, suddenly aware of the silence surrounding her. The ticking filled the chamber so completely that she could not hear the faintest sound of wind outside or the soft creak of the tower settling. Her breath came in shallow bursts. I shouldn't have climbed," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, almost ceremonial. The shadow extended a thin arm, and Ellie felt a subtle pressure in the room, as if it were guiding her, not threatening, not hostile, but inevitable. The air seemed to thicken with every heartbeat, the space around her growing dense and almost tangible. Ellie sank to the floor again, drawing her knees close. She tried to focus on the familiar shapes of the tower, the cracked windows, the dust on the floor, but the shadow made the edges of everything bend, twist. The walls leaned inward, the ceiling lowered, and the room expanded at the same time. She felt suspended in a strange void, the only constants the ticking and the shadow that never spoke, never moved, yet seemed everywhere at once. Hours or moments passed. Time had no meaning here. The clock's hands continued their slow, inexorable march toward midnight, and Ellie realized that every tick, every tiny forward movement was counting not minutes, but her presence, her life, her very attention. She closed her eyes, trying to escape, to calm herself, but the ticking seeped into her skull, into her muscles, into the spaces between her thoughts. When she opened her eyes again, the shadow had shifted, forming an almost imperceptible arch over her, bending the dim moonlight into a narrow, pointed frame around the clock. Ellie's mouth went dry. She had not moved, had not spoken, but the tower seemed aware of her even in stillness. The ticking grew louder. Every vibration traveled through the floor, through the walls, through her bones. She understood, suddenly, that there was no escaping the rhythm. She could fight it, resist it, pretend it did not exist, but the tower had already counted her. Ellie whispered, almost to herself, "I'm here. I see. I understand." And for a moment the ticking slowed, as if acknowledging her words. But the shadow remained, patient and silent, watching, waiting, and the hands of the clock continued their march. Midnight approached.
Chapter 4. The Approaching Hour. Ellie remained seated on the dust-covered floor, her back against the cold stone wall. The moonlight through the cracked window seemed dimmer now, though she was certain it had not shifted. The chamber had grown heavier, the air thick with a stillness that pressed against her lungs and made each breath deliberate, almost painful. The ticking of the clock filled the space entirely, vibrating through the floorboards and into the soles of her boots. I need to understand this," she whispered, her voice small against the rhythm of the tower. Why is it like this?" The shadow remained near the clock, unmoving, yet its presence felt more intense than ever, stretching toward her in quiet insistence. Ellie rose slowly, her legs stiff and unsteady, and moved closer. Her flashlight trembled in her hands. She could feel her pulse accelerating, trying to match the rhythm of the ticking, though every time she tried, it slipped just out of reach, impossible to control. She reached the base of the clock face and ran her hand along the cold metal rim. The vibration under her fingertips was subtle, almost hypnotic, and she felt a strange urge to follow the tremor with her eyes, to watch it move. The shadow's shape shifted slightly, leaning closer, guiding her gaze. Do
Do you want me to touch it? She asked, almost aloud. Is that what? Her words broke off as the clock hands shivered again, trembling forward in minuscule increments. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was sharper now, more insistent, echoing off the stone walls like a pulse inside her skull. The shadow seemed to respond, leaning closer still, its smoky form curling toward the ceiling and floor simultaneously. Ellie felt a cold trickle of fear run down her spine. She wanted to retreat, to scramble down the staircase and out into the foggy streets, but the tower itself seemed to resist her motion. Every movement she made was met with silence, yet the space around her grew narrower, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were bending inward, holding her in place. She swallowed hard. I'm not here to stay, she said, her voice trembling. I just wanted to see it. The shadow did not respond, but a subtle vibration ran through the chamber, almost like acknowledgement. The clock hands moved again, slow but definite. One tick closer to midnight. Ellie shivered, her pulse raced, her stomach knotted. She wanted to speak again, to ask something, anything, but the sound of the ticking filled every empty space in the room. She sank to the floor again, hugging her knees. The flashlight rested on the rim of the clock, casting a thin beam across the shadow. It leaned, ever so slightly, and Ellie felt the room exhale, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that pressed against her chest. Time seemed to fold around her, stretching, contracting, disorienting her senses. Minutes or hours passed. The moonlight outside waned, obscured by thickening fog. The tower's interior remained unchanged, yet the ticking grew louder, sharper, insistent, vibrating through her very bones. Ellie realized she could no longer distinguish between the sound of the clock, the vibration of the floorboards, and her own heartbeat. They had merged into one, a single rhythm that filled every corner of the chamber. The shadow moved again, a subtle lean, a curl in the air that suggested focus, attention. Ellie felt an odd, reluctant fascination. She rose once more, drawn forward by some unspoken understanding, and placed her hand lightly on the clock face. The vibration hummed into her fingertips, traveling up her arm and into her chest. It felt alive, aware. The shadow's form deepened, seeming almost solid now, as if observing her more closely than ever. Ellie whispered, almost to herself, I see it now. I understand. For a brief moment, the ticking slowed, stretching into long, drawn-out echoes. And then, as if impatient, the hands of the clock twitched forward again. 1, 2, 3, closer to midnight. Ellie's breath quickened. The room had not changed, but it felt smaller, darker. The shadow leaned closer, curling toward her like smoke drawn to a flame. The ticking filled the chamber entirely, and she realized with sudden clarity, the tower had been waiting, counting, and now it was near the end of its vigil. Time had become a tangible force, pressing against her chest, bending her perception. She was awake, yet part of her felt suspended, drifting in a rhythm older than memory. The clock hands moved again, inch by inch, and the shadow seemed to acknowledge her presence, patient, inevitable, silent. Ellie swallowed hard, whispering again, I am here. I understand. I see it. The ticking accelerated. Midnight approached. The shadow stretched taller, wider, and Ellie felt the air thicken around her. Her heartbeat, her breath, the clock's pulse, they were no longer separate. They were one, and the tower had claimed her attention, body, and mind. And in that quiet, suffocating moment, Ellie realized she could do nothing but wait for the final tick.
Chapter 5. The final approach. The chamber seemed to grow smaller with each passing moment. Ellie felt the walls pressing in, though the stone had not moved. The moonlight filtered weakly through the cracked windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the dust-flecked floor. The ticking of the clock filled every corner, vibrating into her bones, vibrating into the very air she breathed. She stood slowly, knees stiff and arms trembling, and took a tentative step toward the clock. The shadow remained at its place, dark and silent, its form stretching faintly, like smoke pulled taut in a breeze. Ellie could feel its attention on her, patient, relentless, as if it were measuring each heartbeat, each breath, each thought. I'm ready," she whispered. I want to see it. I understand." The clock hands twitched again, ever so slightly, inching forward. Tick, forward, tick, forward. Ellie felt the vibration in her fingers as she hovered her hand near the rim. The metal was cold, colder than the stone walls, colder than the fog outside, yet somehow alive. The shadow moved in response, not toward her, but stretching, bending, observing, waiting. It was no longer merely a presence, it was a weight, tangible in the air. Ellie's pulse tried to match the ticking, but it was futile. The rhythm of the tower was older, deeper, and far more persistent than any human heart. She swallowed hard and whispered again, almost pleading, I won't resist. I see it. I understand." The clock's hands quivered, then moved forward in a small, deliberate jerk. Tick, one step closer to midnight. The ticking seemed to echo from every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, until Ellie felt she was submerged in it, trapped within its pulse. She wanted to step back, to flee, to scream, but her legs refused to obey. The shadow shifted again, faintly leaning toward her, stretching across the floor. Ellie could feel a subtle pressure in the air, like the room itself was bending her toward the clock. Her hand moved forward, almost on its own, and touched the cold metal. The vibration traveled instantly up her arm, into her chest, and Ellie felt it merge with her heartbeat. The ticking filled her mind completely, drowning all other thoughts. There was no past, no future, only the rhythm of the tower, the pulse of the clock, the presence of the shadow. I understand," she whispered again, her voice trembling but steady. The shadow did not respond. It simply watched. Tick, tick, tick. The clock hands inched forward, minute by minute, second by second, yet somehow slower than anything Ellie could comprehend. Each small movement was measured, deliberate, inevitable. Midnight approached. Ellie sank to the floor, hugging her knees, rocking slightly as the ticking consumed her senses. The shadow curled closer, almost protective in its stillness, and the vibration in the metal hummed through her, a subtle thrum that seemed to synchronize with the pulse of the room itself. She realized with sudden clarity, the tower had been waiting for her, waiting for this night, this moment, this awareness. The ticking was not just time, it was counting her, drawing her into the rhythm of the chamber, folding her into its measure. Tick, one step closer. Ellie's eyelids grew heavy. She whispered again, almost as if to lull herself. I understand. I see it. I am here." The shadow remained, patient, silent, observing, as the final tick of midnight approached. The clock hands shivered, trembling, then twitched forward again. Tick, one step closer. The tower seemed to breathe around her, exhaling slowly,
pulling her into its rhythm, and Ellie felt herself suspended in that vibration, that pulse, that endless ticking. She could no longer distinguish herself from the chamber, from the clock, from the shadow. She was part of the rhythm now. Tick, forward, tick, forward. The hands of the clock trembled at the edge of midnight. The shadow loomed near, watching, waiting, and Ellie whispered one final time, soft and trembling, I am ready." The chamber waited, the shadow waited, the tower waited, and the clock, patient and eternal, prepared to strike 12.
Chapter 6. Midnight's Edge. The chamber felt impossibly still, though the ticking of the clock had never been louder. It filled every corner of the room, reverberating against stone walls, creeping into her bones, seeping into her thoughts. Ellie sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, feeling the vibration of each tick resonate through her. The shadow loomed near the clock, stretching, bending, patient. She whispered, I see it. I understand. I am ready." The hands of the clock trembled once more, inching forward. Tick, forward, tick, forward. Midnight was close, too close. The chamber seemed to contract around her, pressing her into the floor as if the tower itself were aware of her every movement. Ellie lifted her head, eyes fixed on the trembling hands. The metal seemed to quiver under the faint moonlight, reflecting a faint shimmer that felt almost like life. She reached forward, hand hovering above the rim, feeling the subtle vibration that traveled through her fingertips, traveling up her arm and into her chest. The shadow shifted slightly, leaning closer to her without moving fully. Its presence was a heavy weight, pressing her attention forward, insisting on focus. She felt herself drawn toward the clock, toward the trembling hands, as if some invisible thread connected her very will to the mechanism. I am here. I see. I understand. I am ready." The ticking accelerated, faster now, vibrating not just through the chamber, but through her body, through her thoughts, through the very air. She realized she could no longer separate herself from it. Her heartbeat, the clock's pulse, the vibration of the floorboards, they were one. She tried to speak again, to plead, to reason, but no words came. Only the ticking remained. The hands twitched forward once more. Tick, forward. Tick, forward. The room seemed to lean inward, the walls tilting subtly, the shadows stretching wider, more defined. Ellie's eyelids grew heavy. She could feel herself suspended between fear and surrender, between awareness and the rhythm of the tower. She whispered again, her voice trembling, I understand. I am here." The clock hands quivered. The shadow remained, silent and patient, observing. Every vibration, every tick seemed to fold her further into the chamber, into the tower, into the relentless pulse that had consumed her senses. Tick. One step closer to midnight. Ellie's chest rose and fell, almost in time with the ticking, almost in rhythm with the room itself. She felt weightless and heavy at the same time, suspended in the vibration, as if the tower were cradling her in its long, patient awareness. She whispered one final time, barely audible, I am ready." The chamber waited. The shadow waited. The tower waited. The clock hands twitched again. Tick. Forward. The vibration surged, filling her mind, her body, her soul. The final seconds stretched like eternity. each tick an echo in the bones of the tower, in the floorboards beneath her, in the hollow spaces of the chamber. Ellie closed her eyes. She was no longer just in the tower, she was part of it. The ticking filled her, the shadow observed her, and the hands of the clock prepared to strike 12. And in that suspended, suffocating, pulsing moment, Ellie understood completely. The tower had been counting, watching, waiting, and she arrived exactly when it needed her to be present. The final tick approached. Chapter 7. The Strike of Midnight. Ellie's eyes were closed, her body still curled on the dust-flecked floor. The vibration of the ticking had become all-encompassing, pressing into her chest, her skull, her very bones. She could feel it everywhere, and yet, in a strange, terrifying way, she was calm. The tower had been waiting. She had arrived. The shadow loomed near the clock, curling subtly in the faint moonlight, patient, unmoving, yet somehow alive. Every heartbeat she had felt, every breath, had merged into the pulse of the chamber. Time had lost all meaning. Seconds were hours, minutes were eternities, and the clock's hands continued their slow, deliberate march toward 12. Ellie whispered softly, her voice trembling yet steady. "I am here. I understand. I see it." Tick, forward. Tick, forward. The vibration surged through the floorboards, echoing in the walls, running up her legs and into her chest. Her hand hovered above the rim of the clock, tingling with the subtle hum that pulsed like a heartbeat. She felt herself drawn irresistibly toward the trembling hands. The shadow shifted, stretching slightly, as though it were observing her very thoughts. Ellie swallowed, forcing herself to breathe in rhythm with the tower, with the pulse, with the ticking. Her pulse merged with the vibration beneath her, until she felt that the chamber, the clock, the shadow, and herself were all one. Tick, one step closer. The final seconds of the hour stretched into an eternity. Ellie's eyelids fluttered, her limbs heavy, yet her mind sharp with the awareness of what was coming. She whispered again, almost pleading, "I understand. I am ready." The shadow leaned just slightly, closer, and the vibration intensified. The clock hands shivered violently, trembling as if anticipating a final movement. Tick, forward. Tick, forward. Then, a pause. Silence. For a heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. The shadow remained still. The vibration ceased for a moment, and Ellie felt as if the entire tower had paused to acknowledge her presence. And then, the final tick. The hands of the clock moved together, striking 12 exactly. The sound was not a chime, not a clang, but a vibration that filled every inch of the chamber, resonating through stone, metal, and bone. Ellie felt it in her chest, in her mind, in the hollow spaces between her thoughts. The shadow stretched fully, curling around her as if embracing her attention, her presence, her surrender. The vibration surged, lifting her senses to a place where fear, awe, and surrender merged. Time no longer existed. She was part of the tower, part of the rhythm, part of the counting pulse that had waited decades for this single, inevitable moment. Ellie opened her eyes, but the chamber had shifted. The walls were the same, the floorboards still dusty, yet everything felt imbued with the subtle awareness of the tower. The shadow remained near the clock, patient and silent, and Ellie understood. She had been counted, observed, and folded into the rhythm. She rose slowly to her feet, feeling the pulse beneath her, in her chest, in her mind.
It was not frightening now, only immense, eternal, and patient. She whispered one final time, a soft acknowledgement of the tower's presence. I am here. I understand. Outside, the fog thickened. Inside, the ticking softened, almost gentle now, as if the tower itself exhaled. Midnight had arrived, and Ellie was no longer separate from the chamber, from the clock, from the shadow. She was part of its pulse, part of its rhythm, and the tower waited, patient and eternal, for the next visitor to arrive. The silence that followed was alive, and somewhere, deep in the stillness, the faint heartbeat of the clock continued, always waiting, always counting, always patient.
Chapter 8. After Midnight. The chamber was quiet now, though it was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin and made the air feel thick. The ticking of the clock had slowed, softened, like a heartbeat settling after exertion. Ellie remained on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, her body trembling slightly from the intensity of the previous moments. She exhaled slowly, listening to the fading vibration that still pulsed faintly beneath her, through the floorboards into her bones. The shadow lingered near the clock, its form less imposing now, curling softly as if acknowledging her presence without demanding more. Ellie rose slowly, testing her legs. They were stiff and weak, but they held. She took a tentative step toward the center of the room, toward the light pooling from the cracked windows. The chamber felt unchanged, yet everything seemed subtly different, as if the tower itself had shifted slightly, adjusting to her passage, marking her presence. I survived, she whispered, her voice small in the vast space. She tried to laugh softly, though it came out as a nervous, hollow sound. I'm still here. The shadow did not respond, but Ellie felt its attention linger on her, not menacing, not threatening, simply present, watching, waiting. She realized with a sudden, uneasy clarity that it had always been watching, patient through decades of silence, through the fog and the stopped hands of the clock. It had counted everything, and now it had counted her. Ellie took another step closer to the clock face. The metal was still cold, faintly vibrating under her fingertips. She brushed her hand along the rim and felt a subtle pulse, the lingering echo of the tower's rhythm. It was not frightening now, only immense, timeless, patient. She whispered, almost to herself, It's not over, is it?" The shadow shifted slightly but did not move. The vibration beneath her fingers pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder that the clock would continue, that the tower would remain, always waiting, always patient. Midnight had passed, but the rhythm endured, subtle, eternal. Ellie walked slowly to the doorway, glancing over her shoulder at the shadow and the trembling hands of the clock. She hesitated, a part of her longing to remain, to understand more, to follow the rhythm entirely. But another part, the human part, urged her to leave, to step back into the foggy streets of Greywater and feel the ordinary pulse of the world again. Her boots clicked against the worn stairs as she descended. The tower felt quieter, softer now, yet its presence lingered, pressing gently against her mind and memory. The ticking had become a faint hum, a subtle reminder that the chamber, the clock, and the shadow were patient, eternal, and still counting. Outside, the fog wrapped the streets in its thick embrace. Ellie drew a deep breath of the damp night air. She shivered, not entirely from cold, and glanced back at the looming shape of the tower,
The hands were frozen again at 11:57, motionless, yet she knew better. She had felt its pulse. She had been counted. And somewhere inside the tower, the shadow lingered, patient, waiting for the next visitor, for the next heartbeat to draw into its rhythm. Ellie walked slowly away, her footsteps swallowed by the mist. The memory of the clock, the vibration in her bones, the silent observation of the shadow would remain with her always. She could feel it in her pulse, subtle but undeniable. The echo of the tower, still counting, still patient, still eternal.
Chapter 9. Leaving the Tower. Ellie's footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestone streets as she left the fog-enshrouded square behind. The tower loomed behind her, dark and still, its stopped hands frozen at 11:57. But she knew it was not truly silent. Somewhere inside, the clock's pulse continued, faint but persistent, threading through her thoughts. She tried to shake the memory from her mind, the vibration that had run through her bones, the shadow that had loomed silently near the clock, patient and unyielding. But the memory clung, subtle and insistent, like a quiet hum at the back of her skull. Each step she took felt slightly heavier, as if the rhythm of the tower followed her, embedding itself in her heartbeat. The fog swirled around her, curling around lampposts, drifting past closed windows, muffling her footsteps. Ellie stopped briefly to glance over her shoulder. The tower's silhouette was stark against the pale moonlight, a silent sentinel. She shivered, not entirely from the chill. The memory of the chamber's stillness, the quiet insistence of the shadow, pressed against her consciousness. I'm okay," she whispered, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I'm fine. It's over." Yet she knew it was not over. The pulse, the rhythm, the counting, it had entered her in ways she could not undo. Every quiet moment, every silent breath, carried with it the subtle vibration of the tower, a reminder that she had been observed, counted, folded into the chamber's measure. Ellie continued walking, her boots wet from the mist, her breath fogged in the cool night air. She passed familiar streets, familiar buildings, yet nothing felt the same. The world outside the tower seemed too loud, too chaotic, too ordinary. Inside her, the ticking continued, faint but persistent, threading through her thoughts, her pulse, her awareness. She reached the edge of the square and paused. For a moment she felt the pull again, the same subtle tug that had drawn her to the tower earlier. It was almost gentle now, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. Ellie closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to focus on the ordinary rhythm of the night, the wind in the trees, the distant barking of a dog, the muffled hum of lights in distant windows. But the memory lingered, faint yet insistent, a constant echo, the shadow near the clock, the vibration in her bones, the slow, deliberate march of the hands toward midnight. She could feel it in her pulse, subtle but undeniable. The tower was patient. It had counted her. It would continue to count. And it would wait for the next visitor, as silent and eternal as the night itself. Ellie exhaled, letting the fog curl around her. She walked slowly, carefully, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the tower, yet knowing that part of her would never truly leave, the memory, the pulse, the rhythm. These would follow her, patient and unyielding, forever counting the moments that she now carries with her. And somewhere in the distance, the clock tower waited, silent and eternal, its hands frozen yet ever moving, always patient, always counting. Chapter 10. The Day After. Ellie woke with a start, her sheets damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. Sunlight streamed weakly through her bedroom window, cutting across the floor in thin, pale beams. For a moment, she felt relief. The tower was behind her. The night was over. Yet, even as she sat up, the faint vibration lingered in her bones. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A soft pulse threading through her chest, syncing eerily with her heartbeat. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake it off, but the memory of the chamber, the shadow, the ticking, the relentless rhythm clung to her consciousness. It's just a dream," she whispered, voice trembling. It was just a dream." She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood. The floorboards beneath her feet creaked slightly, but even that sound seemed amplified, reverberating faintly like the tower's pulse still echoed through her. She took a deep breath, willing herself to feel the ordinary rhythm of the world, her pulse, her breath, the hum of morning life outside her window. But the vibration persisted, patient, subtle, unyielding. Breakfast was a struggle. Each bite of toast felt mechanical, each sip of coffee almost surreal. The ticking, the rhythm, the shadow, it haunted the edges of her awareness. Whenever she closed her eyes, she could see the clock face frozen at 11:57, the shadow's patient, silent presence curled near it. And though her mind rationalized it, a quiet unease grew in her chest, a sense that she had not truly left the tower at all. She went outside, hoping the fresh air, the ordinary world would clear her mind. The streets were bright, the fog lifted, sunlight reflecting off windows and wet pavement. Yet every step felt slightly off. The rhythm of the town seemed wrong, too loud, too hurried, too ordinary. Her own heartbeat echoed in her ears in a way that felt like the faint pulse of the tower, threading through her awareness, a reminder of the night she could not forget. Ellie tried to speak to people, to force herself into conversation. Words sounded hollow, laughter sounded muted. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the chamber, the shadow, the slow, deliberate march of the clock hands toward midnight. She realized with a sinking clarity that part of her had stayed behind in the tower, folded into its rhythm, and now it lingered inside her, patient and eternal. Hours passed, yet the faint pulse never left her. She tried to work, to read, to distract herself with ordinary tasks, but even in quiet moments, in the stillness of a room or the pause between breaths, she felt it. The subtle vibration threading through her body, her mind, her senses. The shadow's patient observation, the relentless counting of the clock, the infinite patience of the tower, it was with her. By evening, the pulse was familiar, almost comforting in its persistence, though still unnerving. Ellie realized she could no longer ignore it, could no longer pretend that the tower's presence had ended. She had been counted, observed, folded into the rhythm, and it would remain with her, subtle but unyielding, for the rest of her life. She looked out the window at the darkening streets and the fading sunlight. Somewhere, far in the distance, the clock tower still waited, its hands frozen at 11:57, patient, eternal. And she understood with quiet, unavoidable certainty that the shadow, the ticking, the rhythm were never truly gone. The day ended, but the night lived on in her bones. The pulse lingered, faint yet persistent, a quiet reminder that some places never release those who have entered fully, patiently, inevitably.
Chapter 11. Shadows in the Mind. Sleep came reluctantly that night. Ellie lay beneath her blankets, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of her apartment.
Soft hums of pipes, distant traffic, the occasional creak of settling wood. Everything seemed ordinary, and yet the pulse lingered beneath her skin, subtle, insistent, as if the tower's rhythm had traveled with her, threading itself into her body. She closed her eyes, hoping for rest, for the comfort of forgetfulness. But the darkness behind her eyelids was not empty. Faint at first, then growing, shapes formed. Shadows curling and stretching, a thin, smoky presence near the edge of her vision. And then the sound. Faint, but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate ticking. Not from any clock in her apartment, but from somewhere deeper, resonating within her own chest. Ellie's breath quickened. "It's just a dream," she whispered to herself, though the voice sounded small and fragile against the rhythm that pulsed relentlessly. "Just a dream. I'm safe." Yet the pulse persisted, steady, patient. The shadows grew clearer, forming faint curls and arches reminiscent of the figures she had seen in the tower. It did not move, did not approach. It simply waited, patient, silent, observing. Ellie realized with a shiver that the shadow's presence no longer depended on the tower itself. It had become a part of her perception, threading into her mind, her awareness, her dreams. The ticking grew louder. She could feel it now in her fingers, in the soles of her feet, traveling along nerves she had never noticed before. Her pulse matched it involuntarily, quickening, slowing, bending to the rhythm that was no longer just outside her, but inside her, merging with her very being. She sat up in bed, blankets falling around her. Her room looked the same, but subtle differences unsettled her. The shadows of the furniture stretching unnaturally long, corners of the room darkening, bending slightly as if aware of her presence. She could see the faint outline of the clock face in her mind's eye, frozen at 11:57. The shadow near it waiting patiently for the next moment. Ellie shivered. It's just in my head," she whispered, though part of her knew it was more. The tower had counted her, observed her, folded her into its rhythm, and now that rhythm had not stayed behind, it had traveled with her. A subtle hum threading through her consciousness, threading through her perception, threading through her sleep. Hours or minutes passed. The ticking was constant, patient, a quiet vibration under the skin of her reality. Ellie's eyelids grew heavy again, but she dared not close them fully. Even in the darkness, the shadow lingered, a smoky presence curling at the edges of vision, watching, waiting, patient and eternal. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her vigilance. She drifted toward sleep, the rhythm of the tower in her veins. The shadow folded into the corners of her mind. And for the first time since leaving the tower, she surrendered completely to rest. But even in sleep, the pulse continued. Soft, persistent, patient. The tower had not released her. It never would. And somewhere, deep in the darkness of her mind, the shadow waited, silent, eternal, counting.
Chapter 12. The Weight of Awareness. Ellie awoke slowly, the sunlight spilling across her bedroom floor in thin, pale beams. She blinked, trying to shake the lingering remnants of the tower's pulse from her body, but the subtle vibration remained, faint yet undeniable. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts slowed as if every nerve and muscle were still tuned to the rhythm of the clock, the shadow, the chamber. She rose and moved through her morning routine mechanically. Each step, each movement seemed subtly out of sync, yet every now and then she caught herself matching it unconsciously to the faint, internal ticking that had embedded itself in her perception. The world felt slightly off, edges sharper, shadows longer, corners darker. It was as if the tower had left traces behind in her mind, shaping the ordinary into something uncanny. Breakfast was difficult. Each sip of coffee, each bite of toast felt almost ceremonial, the ritual shadowed by the persistent, patient rhythm that now seemed woven into her consciousness. She glanced at her clock. It ticked normally, yet she could feel the difference. Somewhere deep inside, the pulse of the tower remained, subtle but relentless, overlaying the mundane with its ancient, patient cadence. As she left her apartment, the streets of Greywater seemed familiar yet strange. The fog had cleared, sunlight reflected off windows, and life went on around her, ordinary and unaware. But Ellie felt the pull of something unseen, subtle yet insistent. Every lamppost, every flicker of shadow, every small sound seemed to echo with the rhythm she had carried from the tower. She tried to speak to people, to immerse herself in conversation, but the words felt hollow, the exchanges distant. Her awareness kept snapping back to the subtle vibrations threading through her body, the faint outline of shadows curling at the edges of her perception. She realized with quiet, unavoidable dread that the tower's presence had not left her. It was patient, eternal, folded into her awareness, and it had no intention of departing. Hours passed. Ellie moved through her day with a careful, measured awareness, every ordinary action colored by the pulse she carried inside her. She noticed shadows lingering where they should not, the faint echo of ticking when there were no clocks, and the subtle sensation that some unseen presence was observing, patient, counting, always waiting. By evening, exhaustion settled into her bones. The pulse was constant now, faint yet omnipresent. Ellie sat by her window, looking out at the fog rolling back into the streets of Greywater. Somewhere far away, the clock tower waited, its hands frozen at 11:57, patient and eternal. And inside her, the subtle rhythm, the shadow, the counting, had become part of her reality. She exhaled slowly, recognizing the truth she could not escape. She had been observed, counted, folded into a rhythm older than memory, and now, no matter where she went, the tower was with her. And somewhere, beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond perception, the patient pulse of the tower continued, waiting for the next moment, the next heartbeat, the next visitor. Chapter 13. The Lingering Presence. Ellie walked through the streets of Greywater with careful attention, each step deliberate, as if her body had learned a rhythm separate from the world around her. The sun was high, ordinary life bustled on the sidewalks, children laughed in the distance, and cars honked. Yet for Ellie, everything carried the faint echo of the tower's pulse, a subtle vibration threading through her perception, overlaying the mundane with something ancient, patient, and inescapable. She tried to focus on conversation, on work, on the ordinary rhythms of daily life, but each interaction felt slightly warped. Voices seemed to echo, footsteps carried a faint, ghostly repetitions, and shadows clung too long to the edges of her vision. Sometimes, when she glanced at a clock, she could swear the hands flickered, trembled briefly at 11:57, before continuing normally. She knew it was impossible. She knew it was not real, and yet she could not shake the sensation. Even her apartment felt changed. The corners were suddenly darker than she remembered. The floorboards beneath her feet whispered faintly when she walked. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as though something unseen lingered just beyond perception. At times, she could almost feel the shadow near her once more, patient, waiting, silent, though she knew rationally it could not be there. Sleep became a precarious exercise in control. Each night she lay beneath the covers, willing her eyelids to close fully, but the faint ticking always returned, threading into her dreams. The shadow curled at the edges of vision, always patient, always observing. Every soft thump of a heartbeat, every minor sound in her apartment seemed amplified, imbued with meaning, as if she had learned to hear the subtle rhythm of the tower embedded in the very air around her. She tried to distract herself, to immerse in work, to speak to friends, to laugh, but even in brief moments of calm she felt it, the patient counting, the subtle vibration, the reminder that part of her remained folded into the tower's rhythm. No matter where she went, no matter what she did, the shadow lingered. She carried it invisibly, threaded into her perception, her awareness, her very pulse. By evening, Ellie had learned to live with it, though it never eased. She could navigate the world, hold conversations, perform daily tasks, but a quiet unease remained, like a shadow resting at the edges of her mind, whispering reminders of what had happened. Every faint creak of a floorboard, every long shadow in a doorway, every subtle flicker of light reminded her that the tower had claimed a part of her, patient, eternal, and impossible to ignore. She looked out her window at the town, the familiar streets bathed in soft dusk light. Somewhere far away, the tower still waited, hands frozen at 11:57, patient, counting, eternal. And inside her, the pulse continued, subtle yet persistent. She had been observed, she had been counted, and she would carry it with her forever. Ellie exhaled slowly, realizing the truth she had been avoiding. She would never be free from the tower's rhythm, the shadow's patient presence, the subtle, creeping pulse that had folded into her life. It had entered her fully, silently, patiently, and it would remain. Chapter 14. Fractured Perception. Ellie woke before dawn, the faint light spilling through her blinds, casting elongated shadows across her bedroom floor. The pulse was already there, subtle, insistent, threading through her chest, her arms, her legs. She lay still, willing it to fade, but it was a rhythm she could no longer ignore. A quiet echo of the tower, patient, eternal, woven into her perception. The room seemed familiar, yet strange. Corners felt deeper than they should, edges sharper, shadows curling unnaturally at the base of the walls. Even the floorboards beneath her feet seemed to vibrate faintly, responding to the rhythm embedded in her bones. Every sound was amplified, every whisper of the wind outside her window carrying meaning she could not fully comprehend. She rose carefully, boots touching the floor with deliberate care, and moved through the apartment. Each ordinary object, books on the shelves, a cup on the counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator, felt subtly distorted, imbued with a weight she could not name. It was not fear exactly, nor danger. It was awareness, acute and unrelenting, as if the tower's pulse had stretched beyond the boundaries of its stone walls and now threaded itself through the world around her. Ellie tried to distract herself, to work, to speak to friends, to engage with normality, but even in conversation, her perception bent. Words sounded slightly off, voices echoing faintly, as though layered over another rhythm she could feel, but not locate. The faint shadow, patient and curling, seemed to linger just beyond her sight, a reminder that the tower's counting was no longer confined to memory. It had followed her, folded into her awareness, into her perception, into the very pulse of her being. By midday, Ellie realized that the subtle vibration, the quiet ticking, was no longer external. It was a part of her, threading through her heartbeat, echoing in every nerve. It pulsed even when she tried to ignore it, even when she closed her eyes and focused on the world outside.
The tower had marked her, counted her, and in some subtle, patient way claimed her perception. Every shadow in her apartment, every bend of light through the window seemed to echo the chamber where she had first seen the clock and the shadow. She tried to reason with herself. It was memory, it was imagination, it was the residue of fear. But the pulse persisted, patient, insistent, a reminder that some things were no longer merely in the past. By evening, Ellie felt herself tilting between reality and the rhythm of the tower. She walked through her apartment with heightened awareness, noting the smallest shifts in light, the faintest movement of shadows, the softest echo of sound. Each subtle variation became amplified in her mind, and she realized the truth with quiet dread. The tower had followed her into her world. The shadow remained, patient and silent, curling at the edges of perception, counting, observing, eternal. She sank into a chair by the window, gazing at the darkening streets. Somewhere far away the tower waited, hands frozen at 11:57, patient, unyielding, and inside her the pulse continued, subtle yet unrelenting. The rhythm of the tower had entered her fully, silently, and it would remain, threading through her awareness, bending her perception, patient, eternal.
Chapter 15. The Endless Pulse. Ellie sat alone by her window, the streets of Greywater stretching into the foggy distance. Years, or perhaps only months, had passed since the night she climbed the tower, but the rhythm had never left her. The pulse of the clock, the shadow curling near the rim, the slow, deliberate counting, they had become inseparable from her own heartbeat. She could not remember a time when they had not been there. The city moved around her in ordinary motion. Cars hummed along the streets, pedestrians hurried past, conversations rose and fell in muffled waves. Yet Ellie perceived it differently now. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light carried the faint undertone of the tower's pulse, subtle but unyielding. It was patient, eternal, folding time itself into a rhythm that she had learned to obey even as it unnerved her. She closed her eyes, letting the pulse guide her. The shadow appeared in the corners of her mind, patient, silent, watching. She did not fear it anymore. Fear had been replaced by recognition. The tower's counting had marked her, folded her into its measure, and she understood that there was no undoing it. Somewhere far in the distance, the tower still waited, hands frozen at 11:57, patient and unyielding. Ellie had seen it, had been counted, and carried it now in her bones, in her perception, in the subtle vibration threading through every moment of her life. There was no escaping it. There was only living with it. She rose and walked through her apartment, aware of every shadow, every faint creak, every subtle vibration. The rhythm guided her, quiet but persistent, threading through the ordinary and the mundane. She opened the window to the night air, letting it wash over her, but even as she breathed the cool fog, the pulse remained, patient, eternal. Ellie smiled faintly, a recognition more than happiness. She was part of the rhythm now. The tower had counted her, and she had surrendered fully to its measure. It was not frightening, not hostile. It was simply patient, eternal, and inevitable. The fog thickened over Greywater. Somewhere, the distant tower waited. Its shadow curled silently near the frozen hands, counting, observing, patient. And inside Ellie, the pulse continued, subtle, unyielding, eternal. She whispered softly to herself, "I am here. I understand. I am counted." The city moved on, unaware. The fog swallowed the streets,
The night deepened, and the pulse, patient, eternal, unbroken, continued, threading through Ellie, through time, through all the moments to come. The rhythm was endless, and she would never be free.